Hey folks, welcome to another episode of ASP.NET Core from zero to overkill. As you can see, I will record this episode on Linux just because we can. So it's a cross-platform technology. So this time around, I'll be using Linux Mint, although in a virtual machine, so performance may not be as good, but it will suffice. So on the last episode, we took a look at the first steps building with MVC. And today we're taking a step back and look at some more infrastructure related code. Before getting into all the MVC stuff, it was important to see just how to start building something. But now let's take a step back to look at the building blocks. As you can see, even on Linux, we can take a look at what we made in the last application, in the last episode. So if I go to the browser, refresh, everything's basically the same. So we can just create another group and everything's working even here. So let me stop this. Before starting with the overview of basically the startup and program classes, I just want to correct something I said in the last episode, which was not correct. I said that I didn't need to put a route here because this is called index and it's by default the one that's used, but it's incorrect. This would only be the case if on the startup class, instead of app.useMVC, we add MVC with default route. If I did this, I didn't need that route, and even other routes, like for instance groups, weren't needed because it would assume the prefix. It would ignore the controller and assume that groups would be the route and index would be the default action for that route. But as I used add MVC, use MVC, there are no such thing, no such default routes, so we need this route here. So sorry for the mistake. Now let's get to it. In this episode we'll not use this that much. We're going to focus on the program and startup classes. Starting with the program. Like I said, this is basically a console application that happens to start a server. So we can just code here whatever we want. For instance, if we wanted to see the database on the first run, this would be a good place to do it before starting the server. Check the database status and seed it. That would be an option. So, I don't know, let me just put something here like can put here console write line. As this is just normal code, we can just go here and .NET run. This is slower on the virtual machine. Maybe I should have put more memory. But we can see here, before starting ASP.NET related stuff, that console write line just worked. So, as expected, it's just normal code. We can do whatever we want before starting here. Even checking some pre-requirements, stuff like that. Another thing that I think is important to notice is this create default builder. This does a lot, or some things under the hood that in ASP.NET Core 1.0 weren't available. For instance, I can show you here an example application I did at the time, and I have more things here than currently. Why? Because at that time there was no default, so we had to do this by hand. and the initial templates had more stuff, but I just removed everything I didn't need and did this. So this create default builder does those things and more. So if you can go here to see the source code for that method for create default builder. So it does use the content root like I done here. It uses Castro. It has some default configurations that I didn't put here, and checks other things, more things, configures logging by default, and configures some services. Use IIS as integration. This was part of the initial templates, but as I was just running without IIS, I removed it, and more things probably added in .NET Core, ASP.NET Core 2.0. So this does a lot of things. If we want really to configure, we can just remove this create default builder and do it ourselves with only the things we need. But most of the times this works really well. That's why no need to really do anything else. So I think this is it for the program. Not much to say here. Just what I've said already. Seeding databases, configure some logging stuff like it's usual to see configure other logging frameworks besides the default one. Sometimes it's done here, stuff like that. But I don't know. If you have any questions regarding this, please do comment or hit me on Twitter, because I don't really know much else to say here, but I thought it was important to mention that this isn't magic. It's just calling some methods and we can change it if we need to. Now let's take a look at the startup class. So we took a quick look, and this will be quick as well, because I will go into more details on middlewares and dependency injection in the future. But as this is an important part, I just wanted to give a quick overview of playing around with this. So like I mentioned in the previous episode, add MVC basically registers in the dependency injection container the required services for MVC, and use MVC on the other hand registers the middleware that will handle the requests with MVC. So let's take a look at both of these things. Maybe the simplest, we'll start with the middlewares just because, okay. So let's start with something simple. This will all be simple, really. So imagine we want a middleware that adds an header to all requests with some information. So we can do just app use. We can see all of these are just basically, not all, but most of these with these bigger names are extension methods to register middlewares created already. In this case, probably by Microsoft, but if we imported other libraries, they would appear here as well. But in this case, I just want to use the use method that allows us to register anything we want. So we can pass a function here, and that's what I'm going to do. This will be an asynchronous function. I will not go into details on this because I have planned an episode just on async stuff. So just for now, kind of ignore this. We'll get back to this. So a middleware in this case can receive a context and a next, which is like, imagine a pointer to the next middleware. So if we were doing a termination middleware like MVCs, nothing would pass this, or maybe yes, but mainly it's the last middleware, so we wouldn't need to put a next. In this case, we are putting a middleware that will add some information. In this case, we want MVC to work as normal, but we want to add some information, in this case some headers. So we need the next, so we can pass the request to the next middleware for handling. So to do this, and that's why we need the data sync, we just do next.invoke. Rider is kind of annoying. I want this like this. So if we just let it like this, it works as is working right now. We can see watch run, so we can just make changes. Okay, so if we go here, let me close this, back to normal, and that group disappeared because we are using this, the in memory database or not. So, and every time we restart, all information goes away. So it's working without any changes. Now if we want to use an header, we can do something like context response, and on starting we need to do this because if we try to write the header directly here on response, the response may already have started streaming to the client, so we can't write it to it anymore. So we need to register on this event and pass it a function, and in this function into on the context response headers add, and let's see, I'm going with x powered by, and ASP.NET Core. So basic middleware. This has to be asynchronous, so I'm just going to return completed task. Again, I'll go into details on async stuff on a posterior episode, so just ignore this part. The important part is I'm adding headers when the response starts to be transferred to the client, but I have this invoke, so it will still go to use MVC. So if you go here, reload, let me open the developer options, open network so you can see what goes on. And if we click, for instance, edit, now let's look at this. And if we go here, X powered by ASP.NET Core. So we're adding the header, but this is still working. So I can do this. It worked. On the post, we got the header. On the get, we got the header. So it's working as expected. So we just added some things here. We added a new middleware, but it enriches, in this case, the response without interfering with the rest of the application. We could, of course, do something like, imagine if we wanted to let me context dot request dot I don't know. Path dot. Ends with 1. So in this case, we'll only let this pass if the path is different from ends with. So if we go here, if we do this, it works. If we do create, add a new one, it works. But if we go here, it doesn't work because you put that middleware and this just return I don't know what, because we didn't let the request get to MVC. So we could do some logic like this, for not this exact logic because this is stupid, but another thing that makes sense depending on the application we're building. Now let's take a look at another built-in middleware. Let's go into www.root and add, I wanted a new file, why not scratch file, I want text file, plain text. This is not really that normal. Don't know why this is behaving like this. Let's see this in code just. So it's easier if this is acting up. On macOS this just worked normally, don't know what's going on here. So okay, I think I've got it. It's because the folder is missing. So if we create here the root folder, maybe it's normal here. Okay, that was a problem. Weird, but okay. Probably because Git doesn't persist empty folders, at least by default. So let's go to the folder, add new file. Let's call it. So wroot is the folder that by default where we put our static files. So for instance, if we had JS files, CSS, images, this would be the place to put it. By default, it will be a nice place to put those static files. So let's put here hello static sources. Like this. Let's watch. It's a slow start. It's a slow start. Okay. Now let's go to the browser and test.txt. And we got nothing. We got a 404. That's why by default, even though it's on the correct place, we're not serving static files. So we can go to startup and, for instance, here app.use static files. This is another middleware provided by default with ASP.NET Core, which serve static files. We can configure. I think we can configure the path and stuff like that. Let's go. Oh. Yes. We can have some configurations, but in this case, I want to default, and the default is www.root. So by using this with the test file there, if we go here and refresh, now we get this hello. So another use case for middlewares. Middlewares can do anything. For instance, if we wanted to use ASP.NET Core but create another kind of framework instead of MVC, we could just do it. It's one way. There are other ways, but this would be one way to take advantage of the ecosystem and use another framework, ignore MVC, or just create some middlewares. If we had something very simple like 2 endpoints, why not just implement the endpoints with middlewares? Okay, so I'll go into more detail on middlewares in the future post video stuff, but for now I think it's good enough for this quick, or not so quick, but this overview on programming and startup. Now let's take a look at the dependency injection part. For a quick, I guess, overview of dependency injection, not even an overview, but just an example. So like I mentioned earlier, this is a place. Let's create here maybe a new folder just to put these things that will be deleted eventually, and add a directory here, and I'll add an interface. So let's do an interface for generating those IDs we use on the groups. So group ID generator. Nope. Okay. And in here we'll just put long next. That's all we need, right? That's all we need. So when we add a new group, we'll use this interface to get an ID. Now let's make an implementation. So okay, and let's put here private long current ID. So in the next we'll just do return next current ID, and let's start this with 1, because as you may remember, over here we have a one that starts with 1, so we don't want to repeat. So now we don't need this. How this dependency injection stuff works? So basically we declare the dependencies we want on the constructor. There are other ways, but this is the usual way to use dependency injection, is to use constructor injection. So we can go here and we say we want group ID generator. Zero here the helpers. Okay, so this above. That's it. So we're storing the generator. We declare here. We store it, and now we can use it down here where we remove that and just can do next. Now this is not enough. We are declaring we want the dependency in the constructor, but now we need to register with the dependency injection container. To do this, we go to startup and we add services dot add, and in this case I want a singleton. We have three options. We have singleton, scoped, and transient. So a transient will work like in every constructor we require a dependency of such type, a new one will be provided. The scoped will make it that inside one web request, every time we request such dependency, we get the same. A singleton, the first time it creates an instance, it will always be the same. Why do I'm going to register this as a singleton? Because we have here the current ID, and if it's not a singleton, it will always start with 1 and we'll get the same number 2 every time. So we want a singleton in this case. So on the startup we do add singleton and I group ID generator and group I. So we were saying every time someone asks for an I group ID generator, give them a group ID generator instance. In this case, always the same. Okay, so we didn't do anything to add features, we basically changed the ways it works. So if we use the application, it should work as before with the difference. So groups with the difference that internally is working differently. So no, that's not what we want. We want to create a new one. Create, and there it is. So if we had it, it's number 2. We go here. We create number 3. Because it's a singleton, it kept the value. Let's just make a test that will end with an error, but so let's put here add transient. The result will be the same because we only ever increment it once per request, but so let's go to the root, create a new one. This worked. This is number 2. Now let's create another one and another one. Create. This works because this doesn't matter, but now you can see if we check here. So we have groups 2 and groups 2, and now if I click, we get the 500 because on the code of the controller, on the details, we do single or default. If I did first or default, we would get the first one that was inserted, but as I do single or default, if more than one is detected, an error occurs, and that's what happens. We can just do this just to check. So let's go here. It's still restarting. It's done. New one. Another one. So even though there are 2, This goes to new one, and this goes to new one because it was the first inserted. Is the first that's found on the list. So let's get back to this. So this is why we need this to be at singleton. Okay, it was a basic example of using dependency injection in I think it's next post. We're getting next video. I keep confusing this. In the next episode, we'll go into more detail on dependency injection, but this was just an overview of the program and startup files, and dependency injection and middlewares are the main things that we do over here. So that's it for this episode. If you have any doubts, please feel free, comment or contact me in any way that you can, and I'll gladly answer. And if you have suggestions for topics, please send them in as well. I have a lot of things planned, but if I receive better ideas, I will surely take them into consideration. So thanks for watching. Hope to see you again in the next one. See yous.